Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shirley Ann Duguay. Choosing a soulmate is a very important step because this person can become the love of your life or a real nightmare. Shirley Ann Duguay was born on October 11, 1962. She was a native of Prince Edward Island, born and raised in the smallest of the Canadian provinces. Regarding her early years, she grew up in a close, knit family with two sisters. They had a loving father who supported them and was family-oriented, a value he passed on to his daughters. By 1994, Shirley was a 32-year-old mother of 5 children, 2 of whom were from previous relationships. However, she was going through a serious crisis with her husband, Douglas Beamish, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. Shirley worked hard and devoted the rest of her time to her children. This was very helpful to her. She never lost faith in herself or people and maintained a positive attitude, constantly communicating with relatives and friends who supported her in every possible way. She truly needed that support as she barely managed to finalize her divorce proceedings with Doug. A dispute over custody of the children arose during their relationship, which had become increasingly oppressive. Shirley repeatedly complained that she was a victim of domestic violence. People in her close circle often saw traces of beatings on her. Despite the cruelty of the relationship, she rejected any proposals to separate, believing that her husband would simply kill her if she tried to leave. Even when Shirley reached a boiling point, her husband managed to keep her from getting a divorce. She was financially dependent on him, emotionally depressed, and simply afraid she would not be able to cope with the children without his support. Unfortunately, as they aged, his aggression began to shift toward the younger generation. At this point, Shirley sought support from the state to combat domestic violence. The Canadian justice system treated problems within the family with much less attention than the situation required. Despite numerous threats, statements, and evidence of aggression, Shirley failed to achieve any prohibitions or restrictions against Douglas. Finally gathering her strength, Shirley filed for divorce and moved out with the children. Now, the most pressing issue was the division of custody rights. During this period, she had 5 children aged 8 to 15. She feared for their health and safety given her husband's behavior. As a result, she sought sole custody of her 3 youngest children, fearing that Douglas would take revenge and shift his anger onto them. She intended to limit his opportunities for supervised visitations to no more than once a week. Additionally, she was counting on alimony because raising 5 children alone would be too challenging. Though she was already receiving small payments for 2 children from a previous relationship, it was not enough. Shirley's intentions only fueled Doug's anger. By the fall of 1994, she repeatedly expressed fears for her life. Yet, despite everything, she continued to hope for the best and led a normal life. On October 7, 1994, a woman found an abandoned car on Highway 169, near Tyne Valley in rural Prince Edward Island. She couldn't specify how long it had been there since she had been away from home for several days. Upon her return, she immediately noticed a car parked oddly in the middle of a field. When she approached to offer help to the driver, her worry grew. The car had no license plates, and on the windshield, there were numerous small splashes resembling blood. There was no one near the car, so she quickly contacted the police. Upon receipt of report, the law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that something terrible had possibly happened in the car. Inside, they found many bloodstains but no signs of a struggle or dragging nearby, suggesting it had been abandoned far from where a confrontation had taken place. Investigators wondered if the victim of such an attack could have survived. Due to the lack of license plates, identifying the car took longer. Eventually, detectives discovered it belonged to 32-year-old Shirley Ann Duguay. They tried to contact her, but to no avail, as her address was not known. They could only find her father and children. As it turned out, none of her relatives or friends had heard anything about her despite several police calls. Shirley had stopped responding to calls 4 days before the witness reported the abandoned car, approximately on October 3rd. It was normal for her to leave periodically for work, so during that entire time, no one suspected anything was wrong. No one could find the mother of the children's, leading the police to begin a search operation, considering Shirley might be in danger. Given the amount of blood in the cabin, it was evident that the attack had been committed with great cruelty. This was also indicated by the nature of the splashes, which were analyzed by experts. Blood doesn't randomly splatter all over a cabin from random blows, it suggested a prolonged beating. Such behavior was atypical for either robbery or abuse, as typically, brutal criminals are well acquainted with their victims. Naturally, the immediate environment of Shirley was inspected, and everyone who knew Shirley pointed to her ex-husband, Doug. There were no other suspects, only he had issues with her. This man constantly beat her and threatened her. Investigators decided to interview Doug. He confirmed that he had a tense relationship with his wife but blamed her difficult character. He denied any accusations of domestic violence and cruelty on his part, accusing his wife of wanting to spite him after the divorce. Given the capabilities of forensic science in 1994, it was not possible to quickly determine the source of the blood found in the car. Doug behaved calmly, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite numerous witnesses believing him guilty, this was deemed insufficient. The main problem was the absence of a body. It remained unclear what happened to Shirley, so she was still considered missing. Days, weeks, and months passed. It became obvious to everyone that she was likely not alive, but the only suspect persisted. Authorities combed a vast area with a radius of tens of kilometers around where they found the abandoned car. The squad did manage to find valuable evidence, but no direct indications of Doug's involvement. Detectives interrogated him repeatedly again, but to no avail. When they compared the blood found in the car with samples from Shirley's relatives, they confirmed that the profiles matched, which meant the victim of the beating in the car, as expected, was Shirley. Interestingly, in addition to Shirley's blood, traces belonging to someone else were found inside the car. Analysis compared to Doug's blood showed that the additional blood belonged to him. However, without a body, even this evidence did not establish a direct link to the crime or elicit a confession from him. He insisted that the car was his, as Shirley had used it during their 15-year relationship, and he could have repeatedly injured himself inside it. It was impossible to calculate the exact time of his bloodstains' appearance. All of this caused bewilderment and discontent among the relatives of Shirley. The local community was also outraged because a dangerous person was walking free. Many believed in Doug's guilt. The Duguay family insisted that he was the only one capable of such cruelty. In the car, there were numerous splatters of blood, and experts indicated they resulted from medium force blows. However, the police were not sure if the criminal had used a weapon. The cushion on Shirley's seat was soaked in blood. She had used it to sit while driving. Being a petite woman, about 150 centimeters tall and weighing around 45 kilograms, she needed the cushion to control the vehicle effectively. The cushion had blood from two different sources mixed. About 1 kilometer from the abandoned car, they discovered a shovel with traces of blood and 2 black hairs. This evidence became the first valuable clue examined by forensic scientists in the laboratory. Microscopic analysis and comparison with the hairs found on Shirley confirmed they belonged to her. By this time, the search operation had been underway for more than a month. The most significant find was a thick plastic bag containing a pair of sports shoes and a leather jacket, both covered in blood. The items were located 2.5 kilometers from Shirley's car. The blood stain analysis confirmed they belonged to Shirley. However, the shoes and jacket were clearly not her size, were more consistent with a man's. When questioned about the sneakers and jacket, Douglas denied ever having worn anything like that. Unfortunately, there was once again no confirmation of this, as his blood was not found on the jacket or shoes. Detectives noticed that the sizes matched, but this was not enough to bring charges. The list of evidence included significant circumstantial evidence. It turned out to be a tough nut to crack, so more information was needed. The found shoes were sent to shoe expert Key Beadle. He knew well that each person wears shoes in their own way. Differences in shape, size, and structure of feet result in unique features in mechanics. Each person's gait is as unique as their fingerprints. If the shoes had been worn for a long time, This would affect the geometry and wear characteristics. Dr. Key began studying the marks left on the insole and the inner surface of the sole. As part of the investigation, a warrant was obtained to create casts of Douglas's feet. This became an important stage in the process. In parallel, the expert analyzed the condition of the insoles and soles of the discovered shoes, revealing that the criminal had a deformed big toe. A small, twisted print suggested that Doug had used them. Nevertheless, Doug continued to deny his involvement. Forensic experts placed great hopes on analyzing the jacket, which had peculiar fibers, including 20 thin white hairs. With this exception, no other evidence remained on the clothing. The forensic experts examined the fibers under a microscope and found that they resembled animal hair rather than human hair. The detectives were busy with the investigation, and one of them recalled an important detail. When he first came to speak with Doug at his home, he saw a white cat named Snowball. By connecting the owner of the jacket to the animal, they could potentially establish who owned the item of clothing. The police became convinced that these lint particles were left by the criminal's cat, which led to the key question of how to prove the criminal's guilt through his pet. The search began for an expert who dealt with such matters. Detectives made hundreds of phone calls and were amazed to find that such studies had not yet been explored in the history of criminology and forensic science. The closest researchers were pet experts studying their genes to combat diseases. Dr. Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist from the National Institute in the USA, spent decades studying hereditary diseases in cats, including cancer. He knew more about pet genetics than anyone else in the world. However, even he did not promise much. Comparing the DNA profile of Snowball with detected fibers was a unique task. First, it was necessary to obtain a blood sample from the cat, but the owner of the pet was not inclined to cooperate with the police. A significant amount of time was spent just catching the cat on the street and getting a blood sample. Finally, Dr. O'Brien received samples of Snowball's materials, including fur, which were transported almost under escort. Fortunately, many of these hair follicles were preserved, providing enough for a DNA profile comparison. Dr. O'Brien confirmed that the fibers belonged to the same animal. However, a new question arose. Prince Edward Island was nearly isolated, and the doctor had serious suspicions that many domestic cats lived there, which could mean they were all related. If this was indeed the case, then comparing DNA profiles could show a match with any two animals in the province, calling into question all the work done. The police were not planning to give up, so they decided to gather at least 24 blood samples from cats in the area, which would later be delivered to Dr. O'Brien's laboratory for analysis and comparison. This process took even more time, during which the dangerous criminal was still at large. When the report was finally ready, Dr. O'Brien confirmed that there was great genetic diversity among the cats on Prince Edward Island. Not a single pair of the 20 samples collected matched. This led to the conclusion that, apart from Snowball, only one of the 70 million cats could have owned this fur, which became a turning point that confirmed the white fur of the jacket belonged to Douglas's cat. Despite this evidence, Douglas continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the jacket and claimed he had no idea where his ex-wife was. More than 6 months passed, but the body of Shirley was still not found. 7 months after the disappearance of Shirley, a random fisherman was sailing along the river in Enmore. He noticed something suspicious in the bushes along the shore but could not see it clearly. So, he decided to swim closer. From a distance of several meters, he realized that the remains definitely belonged to a person, but the stature was so small that the fisherman initially thought it was a child. They was far from the city, so he thought that wild animals might have dragged someone's body away. He covered the remains with his raincoat and went towards the city to contact the police. When the authorities finally arrived, they saw the remains of a woman in a state of severe decomposition. The situation was not as dire as it could have been because the remains had not been exposed to extreme heat, which partially alleviated the decomposition situation. The examination confirmed that the body belonged to Shirley Ann Duguay. Although it was buried, the body surfaced due to abnormal weather conditions that made the coastal soil unstable, causing it to wash away. Despite the degree of decomposition, it was obvious that Shirley had been subjected to cruelty. The exact cause of death could not be established. There were several theories. One suggested that she had been strangled, while another proposed that she was beaten with a shovel, as the shovel was found earlier. However, it could not be ruled out that the blood stain on the shovel was made after Shirley's death. The killer might have accidentally caused damage when digging up the makeshift grave. Shirley's jaw had been beaten and was broken in 3 places, with one of her missing teeth found in her lungs. The situation had changed dramatically, and it remained to be understood what the motive was, making it possible to hold Douglas accountable. After the body was discovered, investigators decided to take a fresh look at the old evidence and re-examine the area around Shirley's house and car. This yielded important results. First of all, they discovered a letter that had been overlooked earlier, contained threats. Thanks to this letter, the motive for the murder was revealed. It turned out that immediately after Shirley filed for sole custody rights, Douglas wrote her a frightening note in which he said he would be happier to see her in the grave than to lose the children forever. This could have been a cruel joke if not for the alarming fact that this letter was written in her ex-husband's blood. Unfortunately, Shirley did not have time to disclose this, publicize it, or show it to the police, as the criminal carried out his sentence earlier. Additionally, in the house of Shirley, they found photographs showing Shirley and Douglas together. He in the image wore the very jacket from which the hairs of his cat were later found. Finally, a little more than a month after the murder, Douglas was arrested and placed under custody until the hearing began. On July 19, 1996, Douglas Beamish ended up in court, largely thanks to his cat, Snowball, who was instrumental in the pursuit of justice. Douglas was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This case became the first in crime history where DNA and animal materials were used as evidence of a criminal's guilt. According to Dr. O'Brien, the day he began examining and comparing those white hairs marked the birth of veterinary forensic examination. In the following years, this practice was utilized many times and led to the imprisonment of several dangerous criminals. The center at the University of California, Davis, has used its methods in more than 500 cases over the past 15 years, confirming that the tools used to profile human DNA also work reliably on animals. Shirley's daughter, Shelley, grew up to become an advocate for abused women. She spoke about how, as a child, she watched her mother being beaten by her father. After his conviction, Douglas ended up in the Ontario Correctional Centre. In 1998 and 1999, he tried to appeal his conviction but was denied, as DNA evidence is considered irrefutable. In 2013, he first attempted to exercise his right to parole. However, he was again refused, as the commission ruled that the risk of committing another crime was too high. This was not the end of Douglas's story. After almost 25 years behind bars, discussions began about releasing the killer from prison under escort for 12 hours. Another meeting of the parole commission was held, during which relatives were present. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke out, stating that the murder of her sister had triggered a series of family tragedies. One sister other became addicted to alcohol as a means of coping with the pain of loss. It spiraled out of control after Shirley's death. She died first due to health problems, and then her husband committed to end his own life because he could not cope with the death of his beloved wife, having tried to save her until the last moment. She insisted that if Douglas was released, he should be prohibited from living on Prince Edward Island. Shirley's father suffered a series of heart attacks after Marie spoke at the parole board meeting. Interestingly, during these hearings, Douglas took responsibility for Shirley's death for the first time. Prior to this, he had persistently denied his guilt. The commission determined that he still posed a high risk of reoffending, including crimes related to violence and cruelty. Despite finally admitting guilt and realizing the seriousness of his actions, it was believed that significant work still needed to be done before he was ready for full parole. Until that point, he had found it easier to blame others for what had happened than to face the truth. During his time in prison, Douglas suffered 3 heart attacks and kidney failure, nearly dying several times. He is currently serving his sentence in Dorchester Prison, having been transferred there a year before the hearing, during which he was granted a 12-hour escorted release. He expressed a desire to attend a rehabilitation center for ex-offenders convicted of serious crimes located in the Moncton area. Notably, the parole board noted 2 incidents demonstrating that he was not yet ready for life on the outside. In 2019, he threw a knife while preparing food in the kitchen of a minimum security correctional facility, and a year later, he went on a hunger strike, claiming dissatisfaction with the food provided by prison staff. Following the end of the meeting, a decision regarding Douglas Beamish's 12-hour temporary release was not established. He himself stated that he believed he was not ready for full release but wanted to visit a rehabilitation center in Moncton as he did not want to return to Prince Edward Island. It is worth noting that the Correctional Service of Canada had previously allowed him to be temporarily absent under escort for medical reasons and out of compassion. Both occasions took place without incident.